a few, but there are quite a number of them. Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, Austria, and we also have Israel being part of that. And Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Netherlands, and Spain, among others. I don't know why it's stuck. Somebody help me? Okay. Oh, how do I bring it back? Okay. Yes. Okay, so let me now give the specifics of the total ODA funding. We have about, for within our loan portfolio, we have projects worth 2.6 trillion that are active currently. And all of them, when we count them, there are 256 ongoing projects. They are all in different sectors. Within the road sector, we have 30 of them. Water and sanitation sector, we have 40. Energy sector, we have 35. The agriculture sector, we have 24. Education, 17. Health, 15. And others are 95. And how are these projects distributed? We have 44 projects within the World Bank worth 1 trillion. And that constitutes 42% of the entire portfolio of 2.6 trillion. Asia and Pacific follow with 41 projects of 548 billion, constituting a share of 21%. For Europe, we have 61 projects worth 450 billion, constituting 17% of the share. Africa Group has 38 projects worth 287 billion, constituting 11%. For European Union and EIB, we have 20 projects worth 80 billion, constituting 3%. For the UN agencies, all of them are 26 projects, about 50 billion worth of those projects, and the share is 2%. Global Fund has a share of 1% with 8 projects amounting to about 32 billion. The USA has a share of 1% with 8 projects worth 31.5 billion. Arab and Middle East has a share of 1% for 11 projects worth 28.2 billion. The IFAD also has a share of 1% with 4 projects worth 22.7 billion. So total 256 and projects worth 2.6 trillion shillings. So we have tried to do age analysis, and this, Your Excellency, is work in progress. I have asked the entire team in the National Treasury to do portfolio analysis. And I've seen good progress, but we have not completed this work. We hope by this next meeting we'll let you know. Because we want to do age analysis and ask ourselves why we still have a lot of projects that are, that have stayed for too long. What is the impact of them? Why are we having them staying for that long? But this is what is showing in the preliminary work that we have done. 10 years, projects that have done over 10 years, we have loan amount of 216.3 billion, a grant amount of 22.3, totaling 238.6 billion. In this 10-year period, we have only disbursed 132.9 billion, which means 61% of disbursement. We need to ask ourselves, why 10 years? In 10 years, we have only done 61%. This is something that I think we need to work on. Those projects between 5 and 9 years, for loans, they are worth 1.1 trillion. The grants are about 104 billion. So the total portfolio is 1.19 billion. We have only disbursed 43%. Again, it's still low. Those between 0 and 4 years, those between less than 4 years are, actually we have only done 12% disbursement. So total ongoing projects are worth 2.4 trillion and in terms of loans and 245 billion in terms of grants. So the total amount is 2.67 trillion. But you can see we have only disbursed 731 billion. A whole 1.93739 or about 1.94 trillion is yet to be disbursed. So we have a disbursement rate of 30%. That's quite low. And we have isolated also an important component of these projects, which are the stalled projects. Stalled projects and grants of about 2.5 billion. So in total, we have about 238 billion worth of projects, and we have only disbursed 42.6. So disbursement rate is 18%. This is not good because projects are stalled and the money is tight, so we are paying commitment fees. We are not getting value for money, and we have said we need to sort this once and for all. Either we complete them or we just sign off and see whether we just abandon them, because we have just to do something about them. So, Your Excellency, I now present the ODA status as at 31st May in terms of portfolio. So the Africa group has done 54% disbursement. IFAD has done 54%. I'll not go into the numbers because of time. The EU EIB, 47%. Global Fund, 46%. Asia and Pacific, 44%. Europe and World Bank, no, Europe itself is 42%, while World Bank is 35%. Arab and Middle East, 34%. UN agencies, 3%. USA is 0, but I think it's just because of the fact that we have put one digit. I mean 0, eh? Okay. You want me to go back? Off budget, yes. That's why it's 0, because it's off budget. Most of the USA support is off budget. So total, you can see there is, we have 40% disbursement rate for all the projects as at 31st May this year. And this is the status by sector. I think I had mentioned earlier, roads take 12%, water take 15%, energy 14%, education sector 7%, agriculture 9%, health 9%, and the other sectors 37%. Look at the trend. How have we been doing before? We have started from 2016, 2017. I urge you to first look at the lower part. You can see that 2016, 2017, the disbursement rate was 75%. The next fiscal year, 2017, 2018, it went up to 81%. 2018, 2019, another increase to 86%. 2019, 2020, 87%. Then we started declining from 2020, 21. It could be because of COVID at that time. And it has been, it went down to 77%, then 2021, 22, 65%, and then 22, 23 has picked up to 68%. You can see in the disbursement trend that it went up and then it has come down. And so we still, if you are to rate this, if you are doing an exam, this is probably a C plus, not even a B. Now we are looking at, for up to May this year, how have we performed in this fiscal year? Loans revenue, you can see we have a printed estimate of 123.8 billion. But in supplementary 1, we reduced by 9 billion. In supplementary 2, we have reduced by 12 billion. So the total revised estimate is 102.5 billion. And the cumulative disbursement is 66 billion. So we have an absorption rate of 64%. Grants is 63%. And loans under A&A is 62%, while grants under A&A is 25%. So total is 60%. I think we'll be coming back to this, why, especially in supplementary, we have to always, most of these projects are earmarked for budget cuts, because there is no need to project higher expenditure when you can see that you are not going to spend that money anyway by end of the year. So this is 2023-24 absorption rate. The red line is what we had planned to spend, but the blue line is the actual. So you can see the funding gap there. And this is something we need to address, that when we plan a budget, we implement that budget. Otherwise, we plan and it's like planning to fail, and that is really not good. Something we need to know: when we put in the budget, let's implement the budget as planned. Now, let me go through the development partners, the partnership. This is the the development partners disbursement status. I'll go through the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, that's IUCN. At 31st May this year, their disbursement rate is 100%. I'll not go to the numbers, but they have one project. The African Union has one project, 91%. European Development Fund has 13 projects. The disbursement rate is 80%. Government of South Korea has 5 projects. Disbursement rate is 80%. The government of Italy has 5 projects with a disbursement rate of 74%. IFAD has 4 projects with a disbursement rate of 74%. The government of China has in these three projects and has a disbursement rate of 70%. World Bank has 33 projects with a disbursement rate of 66%. The government of Belgium, 5 projects, 65%. Government of India is 2 projects, 64% disbursement rate. Africa Development Fund, 34 projects, disbursement rate of 62%. UN Women, that is United Nations Women, has a disbursement rate of 59% for 1 project, while government of France has 15 projects with 59% disbursement rate. Green Climate Fund, we have 2 projects, and the absorption rate is what you see there, 58%. Same to government of Germany, 21 projects, 51% disbursement rate. Government of Finland, 2 projects, 58%. Government of Sweden, 47%. And you see that Global Fund is 40%. We have the rest of I'm not sure whether I should go through all of them, but this can be availed to you. You can read so that I save time. We have off-budget ODA projects. We have projects that come in, we don't get in the budget, but they support government of Kenya, and we want to monitor. So Gavi is supporting the health sector under the project called Health System Management. This is a grant which was signed in 2001. It has 23 years, and it is now about 23 years since it was signed. The amount is 42.5 billion, and we are doing consultation to align the next funding cycle. For WFP, we have also a project called Sustainable Food Systems and Resilience Livelihoods project in the health sector, and it's a grant. The amount is what you see there. The government of Japan has 3 projects in interior and roads, and all of them are grants, except that of loans, which is 2.8 billion. Austria and India, USAID, and Ford Foundation, you can see all the details there. I really don't need to go through all of them, but that is the status of off-budget ODA projects. So let me finish my presentation with just highlighting why is it that we have low absorption rate, as you have seen. There are those related to government of Kenya, which we are actually addressing, and I've been meeting the teams. I'm hoping through the executive office of the president, we work together to see how to bring together MDS to address this problem. One is the historical issues that have to do with project design that result in change of scope. When you change scope, it means the project has to slow down a bit before it picks up. There are projects we start when you have not sorted issues around way leaves or land-related settlement issues. So a project goes on and then it stops because there's no way leave. Contractors sometimes face challenges. They are declared bankrupt, or some people go to court and the matter is delayed. So we have mitigating measures which we have been discussing. And I believe we will come back to this later, but we are talking about really making sure that we have a checklist of mandatory requirements prior to mobilization of external financing. And each MDA that requires support must make sure that you have all these mandatory requirements. Then you seek for funding when you know we can proceed without any hiccup. And also, we are saying we need to establish the project implementation management unit and follow the PIM guidelines. Then try and we create a dashboard which can help us see how it is moving and then take corrective measures. We have also situations where we face budget reductions, and especially when we are now doing fiscal consolidation. What we have submitted to Parliament now and for next year, we want to achieve a fiscal consolidation of around 3.4% of GDP. And that means trying to raise revenue, but also rationalizing expenditure. And for the supplementary budget that is before Parliament now, what we have done also is to look at progress up to end of May and see that within 1 month, clearly there is no way that there will be absorption. And that is a candidate for cutting. And that also tends to impact the projects negatively. There is also the counterpart funding, which has been a problem. It suffers more because when we are doing budget cuts, we may not be able to allocate the resources. So, and this is why there's a proposal on how to handle counterpart funding. Sometimes Parliament delays in approving the county government allocation, additional allocation act. So when it delays, by the time it's approved, then you implement the project. Clearly before end of the year, you will find that you will not be able to absorb the money you have already put in the budget. So we have some mitigation measures that you see there. And then the third issue is poor contract management and capacity challenges, which have led to poor execution of contracts, because you have sometimes we exclude key clauses in taxes within the Public Procurement and Disposal Act and like the Public Financial Management Act. You may have some clauses on advance payment, but you may not properly show it in the contract, and then it becomes a problem when you're implementing. So sometimes we have submission of payments without requisite documents, and because of that, there's back and forth in terms of asking for those documents that delays payments. We have last-minute rush for payments on projects ending, and that can be also problematic. Then there are penalties and interest on delayed payments, which is an issue. We have mitigating measures there. I did not go through them because I think I'll mention them in my closing remarks. Others are conditioned precedents to effectiveness. Sometimes we have delays in granting of legal clearance and legal opinion, especially from the Office of the Attorney General. Sometimes there's also delay in subsidiary agreements, back and forth within ministries, National Treasury, and the AG. That is a challenge. Then we also sometimes have what we call supply-driven projects, where sometimes you have money, people coming, donors coming in to push to say we have money, but it's really not that we need that. But some entities will require, they may not be in line with priorities of government, but we still take, and that becomes a challenge. Then M&E is also an area that we want to improve. Then we have those related to development partners. We have a problem sometimes when we have delays in award of contracts or delay in procurement of PIU, the project implementation unit staff, because of not getting no objection from the partners, because we can't proceed without getting no objection. So we have seen mitigating measures like World Bank and Africa Development Bank. they have actually come up with the system-based approvals. And this is really helping to address delays. Maybe other donors can also follow the queue. And National Treasury continues to engage the development partners and ministries with a view to resolving this issue of no objection challenges. Then we have varied condition precedents by different development partners for co-finance projects. And this leads to delays in commencement of the project. So again, we are engaging to see how to sort this. We also have the problem of multi-layered contract management for co-finance projects, like the Arab Middle East development partners, which leads to delays. Then we have length process period in redesigning of projects by consultants, delaying actual implementation. So I want to finish this presentation by presenting to you what we have agreed as way forward. We propose the following policy and technical recommendations. On policy, we are saying all projects must be approved by cabinet for ownership and policy direction. 2, we want all projects to comply with the legal framework for ODA funding with emphasis on the PIM process and the National Treasury circulars, particularly circular number 12 of 2018. We need to ensure that no new projects are initiated before completion of the old ones. The fourth one is that we need to encourage financiers to take up 100% cost of project to reduce burden of counterpart funding. We have seen this done by World Bank, and the Africa Development Bank has also done it. And this, because of that, we have been able to push projects forward because the problem of lack of counterpart funding is not there anymore for those entities. Number 5 is that we need to encourage all development partners to develop framework agreements as a guide to funding. And number 6, county governments to be allowed access to at least 50% of funds prior to the approval of the County Government Additional Allocation Act. We also want to encourage development partners to bring projects on budget in the spirit of aid effectiveness. And we are also proposing that we ensure that no off-budget projects are included in the appropriated estimates. And number 9 is that all development partners mapping should map to identify a comparative advantage by sectors to guide on new funding to ascertain an equitable spread. And lastly, we need to review certain development partners recruitment policy of the PIU unit to improve it, to make sure that it moves fast. And on technical, we are saying we need continuous portfolio review, and this should be joined between MDAs and development partners. We are also saying MDAs should identify projects for cancellation and or restructuring, especially those with low capacity absorption and are over 5 years. We have done a few projects with the World Bank where we have cancelled some of them and or prioritize. Then development partners should use country systems, and where need to be to strengthen the system. Where necessary, we need to strengthen the system, particularly on procurement and audit. We need to ensure that all MDAs prepare and submit realistic budgets and ring-fence counterpart funding, the counterpart funds. We also need to ensure relevant and adequate capacity building for project implementation teams, both at the National Treasury and MTS, to make sure that they are in place before commencement of projects. I think I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PS Kipto. I would now like to invite Dr. Stephen Jackson, the UN Resident Coordinator, to supplement the presentation and highlight some of the challenges from the development partners side and propose some steps in the longer term and towards the next DPF. Stephen Jackson, may I encourage you to be brief?
You may indeed. Thank you very much, Sandra. And PS, thank you so much for the presentation and for its candor. A C+. I think all of us would agree with that. And I think that there is much that can be done on the government side and on the development partner side to get us up to that A+, where we are all committed to being. I think you probably heard some gasps in the room from some of the development partners in terms of the figures. And I think that is testament to the following. It reminds me of the story of, putting 5 blindfold men in a room and then trotting in an elephant, and one of them grasps the trunk and thinks that he's got hold of a garden hose, and one holds the leg and thinks he's got hold of something else. And so we're all looking at this rather large and complicated beast, the elephant, that is this partnership that we have together that goes in multiple directions. And each of us, I think, are only at the moment able to see part of it. And that leads to us arriving at some different places in terms of the analysis, and I'll come to that, but actually a surprising degree of convergence in some of the diagnostics and some of the recommendations. And to start at the end, what I would say is that this points to the need to get this task force between government and partners up and running as soon as possible, to bring these different worldviews and analyses together as soon as we can. I have a very brief presentation that will take us through what we identified from the development partner side through some interviewing and some survey work as the sort of 5 main baskets of challenges that I think we feel we have. And there's quite a degree of convergence there. So let me go to the first of them. So we agree with you. I think that there is some inconsistency both on our side and, if I may, on government side in how we define. So some of the definitions that were used to draw up those numbers, are we talking about quote unquote on budget? Are we talking about quote unquote off budget? The different groupings, whether actors are bilateral or multilateral, what constitutes a project? Is it a loan? Is it a grant? Is it a multi-year? Is it a single year? And so on and so forth. There's some inconsistency in the definitions, and then also in the requests and the requirements which lead to delays in signings of agreements. And I think you pointed to that towards the end of your presentation, PS. These were conditions precedent to agreement, I think was how you put it. So I think there's a lot we can do there in terms of streamlining procedures, standardizing templates, and so on as appropriate. The next, and I really want to lean into this one quite hard, there are some practical, and I emphasize that they are practical, not principled, challenges for many development partners in the room in living up to the strictures of the Public Finance Management Act and some of the associated regulations that go with that. Why do I say practical, not principled? So we are all, as development partners, committed to full visibility and transparency of what we are doing, who we are working with, what we're trying to accomplish for Kenya and with you, and the maximum possible alignment. But what we see in the development partner landscape is a real variety of different forms of engagement and, critically, scales of engagement. So the same kind of approvals procedure that work for a, forgive me, Keith, a $100 or $200 million loan don't work for a 500,000 project. There I'm talking in dollars, but we can make the same numbers. So already anticipating the idea that every project would need cabinet approval, I can say from the perspective of the United Nations, where we have literally hundreds of projects, the cabinet would be doing nothing else. So what we need is different approval mechanisms for different scales and different forms of engagement. And that leads on this point, there was a particular gasp from me when the UN was listed with a 0% implementation rate. In this very tent, just a few weeks ago, with the Deputy President, we reported an implementation rate of 86%. And the discrepancy there, of course, is that the majority of the work that the United Nations does with the support of the partners in the whole is quote unquote off budget. And I think the same, David, where are you, for the United States? 0%. I don't think Congress would love it if you were at 0%. So we know you're not. Why are we quote unquote off budget? I actually asked in our country team, one of our experts, to give us a presentation just a couple of weeks ago on what it would take to move UN projects and programs to visibility on budget. And I had to stop the colleague on slide 8 and step 27 of, I think, 34 steps. And again, forgive me, Keith, a 34-stage approval process maybe for a loan portfolio in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and therefore in the, what would that be, the tens of billions of shillings. But if you're going to go through a 34-stage approval process for a project that is a pilot project at, 100 million shillings in a couple of counties, it just doesn't make sense. So we have to find a way, and in short, the Public Finance Management Act doesn't work for the scale at which some of us are working, and I know that that's true of some of the bilaterals. Let me hasten. Lengthy delays in processing invoices, disbursements, or related to taxation and exemptions. I think there's a lot of work that we can do here. It is the case, for example, that for many of us, approvals for disbursement have to be signed off on by somebody at your level, PS, or above. And we know how overwhelmed you are and how often people like you are traveling. But there is right now no delegation of authority, and it seems to us that perhaps for smaller sums, there could be a delegation of authority. Again, a kind of subsidiarity of approval. But often contractually agreed to timelines are broken. Sometimes that's us, sometimes, forgive me, that is you, and that creates unnecessary burdens. And as you pointed out, PS, particularly for the loans, that means that government is continuing to pay administration fees while implementation is remaining stalled. That doesn't work for anybody. So are there some low-hanging fruit there around delegation of authority and otherwise? The question of counterpart funding, and again, PS, we converge with you here. That often is a cause for delay and unpredictability. If counterpart funding is expected either as the government's contribution to a loan agreement or to a grant agreement, we need to have much better prioritization with you and consultation with you beforehand. And we as partners share in that. But other times, and your boss and mine, Prof. Juguna, is not in the room yet, I think, but I remember him receiving me at 6 in the morning to unblock a small but significant grant agreement between a bilateral partner and a UN entity and the Kenyan government. And I was told, well, the reason it's blocked, Stephen, is that there's no provision made for the counterpart funding that the program expects. To which I said, yes, but the program doesn't expect any counterpart funding. CS, it's a misunderstanding. We had the letter of no objection within 35 minutes. So very often there can be this mistaken assumption that counterpart funding is needed when it isn't. So we have to get better at that. Final point. So lack of visibility to and importance given to development partner support that is not in the form of direct budget support. A decade ago, a lot of us were doing direct budget support. These days, very few of us are. And I think what we saw in the presentation that you gave, which was excellent, but it means that the direct budget support and the on-budget work is much more visible to government than the stuff that is, quote unquote, off budget. We need to find a way to render that quote unquote off budget support more visible to government, more accountable to government, more transparent, and where it can be better aligned, but in a way that doesn't hold things up. And as I've already said, I think we collectively feel that the Public Finance Management Act isn't a supple enough tool to deliver on that. So we need to find other ways to render that larger quantity of support. I was trying to do the numbers in my head, but I think it's at least as much again. I think it amounts collectively to about another $2 billion per annum, or something like 200 billion shillings. Please don't quote me on that because I'm doing it from memory, but it's about that order of magnitude. How do we render that visible to you, accountable to you, transparent to you? So, like you, some thoughts about a way forward. We reaffirm our commitment to strengthen that visibility and that alignment. We want to work with government to do that. We want together better to seek the solutions that would help to render visible that full totality of the support that is brought, including support that is not directly on the budget. Our discussions today were intended as a waypoint. We are converging what we see from the partner side and what government sees from its side. I think, therefore, the candor that we've had this morning, I hope, is is a very helpful step towards that. I think it's critical now that we do have that joint task force that can converge the two views, that can dig into the recommendations together, dig into the analysis together, come up with some recommendations to bring to the Development Partners Forum, inshallah, in September. Particularly, what are the key blockages? I think we've both identified those. What are some low-hanging fruits? And what are some priorities, even though they're not very low-hanging? I don't think that the taxation exemption issue is a low-hanging fruit. It's a complicated one, but it is very important that we get it right for all of the partners in the room. We need to then identify timelines, milestones, and responsible focal points on government side and the development partners side for the implementation of each recommendation. And then we need, and this is the crucial bit, that's what this Development Partnership Forum is for, is to bring this issue back and for us to hold ourselves accountable to what we've agreed. Where are we on fixing the visibility? Where are we on fixing the implementation pace? Where are we on working out better ways to ensure that visibility, that alignment, that transparency, and that accountability that don't hold us back and hold us up? Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Dr. Stephen Jackson, and add to that, PS Kiptor. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to open up for plenary, and I'm requesting for brief and action-oriented inputs, which will be collated by our rapporteurs from the Office of the Deputy President, and there will be roving mics going around. So I would like to invite, if you'd like to make an intervention, I'm going to open the floor now. Please raise your hand. Please introduce yourself so that we know where the intervention is coming from. Okay, we have an intervention there. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Happy to be here. I'm Wanjiru Gekonyo. I'm representing Reality of Aid Africa. And thank you for the detailed presentation. And it brings to mind, coming from a civil society perspective, there was a discussion that I was party to, and I'm not sure how far it progressed, around a program called COST. And this program was being proposed to the government of Kenya by another civil society platform to bring visibility to projects around PIMS, the project implementation framework, and just generally to open it up. And looking at this, I think there's need to pay attention to that accountability side, while sorting out some of the nitty-gritty around, what we are seeing here. So I'd like to add that. And maybe the other reflection is around the budget approval process and compliance. We are seeing the same thing at counties, where projects are put into the budget, the assessment and evaluations are not done, the land's not secured, and then you have, non-implementation. So that is also, it's a compliance issue, it's a culture, but it's also looking at the regulations and the law, because this is a gap that was introduced with this PFM. The previous planning and approval process was much more open. And again, stressing, of course, to ensure that there's collaborative government, there's oversight by citizens in the process as this happens. So for me, it's just accountability. There are tools and platforms that exist. This is a fantastic forum to consider bringing on board, that level of transparency and visibility. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Wanjiru, for that on visibility and transparency around the approval system as well. We have a question.
Thank you. Not a question, just a couple of comments following up, and thank you for the time and space.
Introduction, please.
Yeah, my name is David Gosney. I'm the USAID Mission Director here for Kenya and East Africa. Just a couple quick things to follow up on the really helpful presentations. First, want to underscore what Stephen mentioned is a complete commitment for complete transparency and accountability for all funding. kind of to underscore for USAID's contributions over the last 2 years, each year alone, we provided over 1 trillion Kenyan shillings of development assistance. All of that captured either through our implementation letters that are signed by both the CS and the, from the relevant ministry and the CS for Treasury. And so fully committed to working with the Treasury to determine best how to capture those. And I think any development partner assistance so that it's fully accounted for in whatever way is appropriate going forward. The second thing, just to underscore on the VAT issue and give you a very practical example. Right now, very much appreciate the efforts that are going on in the Treasury office to continue to reform that process. The reality is our figures, partly because of our processes, we really only recap about 15% on average of all the VAT that is paid through our partners, largely because it takes quite a long time to do that in the time results in either things being time barred or our inability to capture that. So we also are standby ready to provide technical assistance, however helpful with the ministry and the Treasury office and other development partners to work on that going forward. And the last thing is really this commitment to efficiency. One of the things that's, I think, sort of related to absorption there and somewhat to government contributions is one of the most meaningful contributions that can be made is just support for staff to attend important coordination meetings. We're all committed to that. Per diems and a common policy and perspective on that. And I know that, we look forward and we're continuing to work with the Development Effectiveness Working Group to come up with a common understanding on what the roles and responsibilities are in terms of meeting locations, per diems amount, top-ups, those type of things. So we have a consistent approach to all that and look forward to continuing to work the Treasury Office on that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those 3 points around transparency, technical assistance, and efficiencies. And we now have CS Tuya? Yes? Is it? No? I'm sorry. Yes. So mic for CS Moses Kurian, please.
Thank you very much, Wanjiro. I just want to give some perspective from this other side of government. I am delighted with presentation by Professor Kipto, by Dr. Kipto, because if it was a courtroom, it could have been a pre-bargain or mitigation. But I think some real issues have come out that we as government need to sort out in terms of the process. There is a lot of cleaning up required. But on the good side, I want to report that going forward, the issue of absorption of development partner financing is now beginning from 1st of July, is going to be part of the performance contracting. So that as we measure the people, we'll also be measuring them in terms of how they are absorbing development partner program. Secondly, I think from the co-chair, the issue of counterpart funding, I think has been very clear that not all the time is it a requirement for program to proceed with counterpart funding. So again, there is need for the 2 sides to sit together and say, is the issue of counterpart funding becoming a bogeyman? Is it being blamed for everything? So that even where it is other things that should be done, we are quick to say it is counterpart funding. So I think we need to be microscopic on this particular issue, so that now we are able to say what is the real reason for this program not to proceed. Let me also say that under the my delivery docket, beginning from next week, I have a monthly reporting obligation to cabinet, and among the things I'll be reporting on to cabinet is this issue of absorption and performance generally of this development partner platform, because we realize the need for us to escalate and report them on a very high level. may I finish by saying that the issue of mapping of the government side and the development partner part needs to be sharpened. We need to really ask ourselves which government ministry or department has got which program and who are the partner interested in that particular program. I think there's still some loose ends, which I think the units in the office of the deputy president will work with the ministry to ensure that we become more sharper in the clustering and especially in the pairing and mapping of partners to departments. Thank you.
Thank you, CS, for that. We have time for one more intervention from the floor. If so, I think we'll go to you. Yes? If you could please keep it brief. Yeah.
Yes, good morning. My name is Henriette Geiger. I'm the European Union ambassador. First of all, thank you, Vice President Gachagua, for the kind invitation, and PS Kipto for the very good presentation. I want to start by fully endorsing what my US colleague just said on all 3 points. These are also points that are very valid for us, and they merit some further in-depth discussions in a working group format. Also on the figures and the tables presented by the PS, definitely we need to sit down on some of the figures to coordinate. I wanted to talk about streamlining of the process, because when we talk about absorption capacity, what Stephen said before, unblocking is what we do right now. We unblock one by one, and that is not the way we can work, because if I unblock my project, then the other projects are being blocked. So we unblock what is good for us, and the rest after me the flood. And that cannot ever lead to 100% absorption. So we have to streamline the system so we do not need to unblock and intervene for things to go ahead. Regarding the co-financing, this is indeed a very critical issue as at this juncture of Kenya, and we all know why. But the EU is working with both grants and soft loans and concessional loans. So if there's no co-financing, we cannot do blending of grants and loans, leveraging much larger amounts. So in one way or another, we have to find a way around it. Otherwise, we can only work with grants, which will greatly limit the flows into Kenya. So this is also something that is not easy to resolve, but we have to resolve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I think those were all very good interventions, and I'm hoping our colleagues were able to take those down. We are now, because we're pressed for time, I would say that in order to ensure the action-oriented spirit of the ambitions of His Excellency, the Deputy President, Government of Kenya, and development partners, they've mutually agreed on a decision for this agenda item, and I think a lot of it has been reflected in the conversation here, that will allow us to take steps to address the challenges that have surfaced here related to the absorption capacities of both loans and grants. And so to briefly summarize, and some of this was alluded to by our presentations, our presenters earlier, that development partners and government will together work to strengthen visibility and alignment of support to Kenya, particularly seeking solutions to render visible and better aligned partnership that is not in the form of direct budget support. And the DPF will mandate a small task force comprising representatives from the government and developing partners to work on identifying concrete recommendations, some of which of course were mentioned here, for how to address these key challenges related to absorption capacities. And the task force will report back at the next Development Partners Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the agenda item on absorption capacities, and we will now move on to the strengthening resilience agenda item, which is our second agenda item for today. Again, following the DPF last November, it was agreed that partners would work jointly to identify recommendations for how to strengthen resilience to ensure that this is more coordinated, inclusive, and flexible, among other things. Specifically, 10 joint sector working groups under the coordination of the Office of the Deputy President were tasked to provide inputs to an integrated resilience framework that will help guide both the government and the development partners on how to strengthen our response and report back on this to the DPF membership. I would like now to introduce a very short 1-minute video on resilience produced by the Office of the Deputy President.
In the recent past, heart-wrenching shocks have pierced the heart of Kenya. Irrespective of the challenges faced by adverse effects of climate change, geopolitical factors, political dynamics, and technological disruptions, the nation has stood strong but bruised. We cannot rule out future pandemics, accidents, droughts, floods, epidemics, cultural shifts, political instabilities, food insecurities, and other shocks and stressors that hit with little or no notice. So, we must come together in the face of adversity. We must build and strengthen resilience as individuals, households, organizations, communities, and as a nation. There is need for us to have mechanisms which will ensure better governance and coordination. The need and call to better responses, a harmonized approach, and refined adaptation will yield a prepared nation against disruptions, shocks, and stresses. A national resilience framework will therefore strengthen flexibility, adaptability, and better response